Welcome to the Overcoming Adversity podcast, where it's all about a transformational growth and having a resilient mindset. I'm your host, Michael Allison. And before we get started, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Today, we have a really good one for you, special guest for you. She's the CEO of The Fifth Principle. They offer smart learning for business success, a step-by-step process that will protect the future viability of your company by embedding learning into the daily fabric of your organization. She's also a faith-based person. She's been through her own fair shares of adversities, and I'd love to welcome you to the show, Ms. Cheryl Johnson.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Cheryl, thank you so much for being here. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. We were speaking behind stage for you to come on the show, and I was just telling you that I was thoroughly impressed with the company that you created, and just more impressed by your story and your story of resilience with so much that you've been through. So I just want to thank you so much for being transparent and being vulnerable and just being available to come on the show.
Sure.
So let's hop into it, Cheryl. I would like to know a little bit about where you're from, where you grew up, and what was that like for you?
Well, I guess that's the beginning of the story. I will preface this all by saying I had a good childhood. You know, most people, when you go into therapy and things, they always want to go back to your childhood. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You know, I had good parents. I was born in Wyoming. We moved from there to Alaska, and from there to Arizona, and from Arizona back to Wyoming. And that was kind of the beginning of my 42 times that I've moved in my life. And no, I'm not military. I know I'm not military. So everybody's like, what's up with that? So, you know, there was a fair bit of challenges in moving around, especially when we left Alaska. I was totally devastated to lose my friends. And I was I think I was 12. And, you know, at 12 years old, everything's traumatic. But I did have some really good friends up there. And that was a real challenge for me to lose them. But you know, you move on and you make more friends. And that's what I realized every time I moved was I wasn't really moving and leaving things behind. I was just adding friends and experiences to my life.
Absolutely. That's how I look at it too as well. I think it's amazing that you moved around 42 times. Like you said, you would think that you probably served in the military, or you were a military brat or something like that, because that's how it usually is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was a flight attendant at one point, but even I can't even blame it on that. Sometimes, honestly, I just moved across the street, you know, and so I counted that as a move. I guess it's technically not moving from one, you know, geographic location to another. It's just, and my dad, I think I got it from my dad, because my dad definitely, even while we lived in Alaska 5 years, I think we moved 5 times in 5 years.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I was thinking as you were saying that, and I moved from Jamaica to Miami. We moved 3 times in Miami. We moved from Overtown to Little Haiti to Opelika and Carroll City until I moved out and joined the military. But what I thought was really cool is that as a kid, you were able to just pick up and move on and make friends, and then too much stress about that. I think that's pretty cool, because some kids, you know, nowadays, like if they lose their friends, it's dramatic. You know what I mean?
The world has come to an end. Yes. And I have a lot of people ask me, because I've moved around, and they're like, oh, I couldn't move my kids while we were in high school, or, oh, I couldn't move them while they're in junior high. That's just too traumatic for them. And then they ask me, wasn't that traumatic for you? I was like, well, it was a challenge. I wouldn't say it was traumatic. And they're like, oh, I can't do that to my kids. And I'm like, you know, to each their own. But like I said, to me, it was just, I'm just adding more to my experiences and my life. And I really feel blessed, because I feel like, having lived in so many different places, and yes, I've covered I haven't moved to every state in the United States, but I've been to every state in the United States, and spent a significant amount of time in each one, enough to really get to know the culture and the people. And when you do that, it broadens your perspective. And I think, you know, it's hard when you live in one place, because your perspective is so narrow.
Right. I agree with you. You know, so we almost every single trip that we go on that we can, me and my wife, we take our kids. when they were younger. And now that we have one in college and one in high school, but they're so much diverse than their friends. They have so
Mm-hmm.
much things that if they were just like coddled and babied and not do this, not do that, I could tell the difference with them just being able to just vocalize things, talk about things, able just to try different food, different types of culture, these types of things. Where once
Mm-hmm.
you get them out of their comfort zone, like it's okay.
Yeah. And I think that, on the subject of adversity, that's all about getting outside your comfort zone. And I think a lot of what happened to me in my childhood, I think, kind of prepared me for that, because I was constantly living outside of my comfort zone and having to deal with that anxiety. And I don't mean clinical anxiety, but just the anxiety of, oh, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Life isn't predictable, that kind of thing. So I think it helped prepare me for that.
Got you. So you've created this phenomenal business called the Fifth Principle. And as I was reading the intro, I see that you work really, really, really closely and customized with businesses. So myself as a business owner, think of all these different things that I could do and help businesses. So can you tell us a little bit about your business and what you guys do?
Sure. For, I don't know, 20 plus years, I've been I'm an independent consultant, and I'm worked with, as many times as I've moved around, I've also had well over 100 different customers, and each of them bring their own unique set of challenges and experiences. But I've always had a very strong passion for learning. And I felt like learning to me is kind of the central, if you can learn to love learning, you'll be okay in life. When my kids were little, all of their parents were sending their kids to preschools, like which ones are going to teach them their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, and make sure that they can do math before they get in kindergarten, and everything. And I was like, I was like, I'm not exaggerating when I say my kids I had 3 of them under the age of 5, and we were reading chapter books
Wow.
as kids. And we would sit down and I would start reading, and I'd say, okay, we're just going to read one chapter tonight. That's all, just one chapter. No, 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 no. Next chapter, next chapter. Sometimes they would sit for, like 2, 3 hours just wanting me to read to them. And we went to children's museums. We went to science museums. At one point, my business early on required me to drive all over the state of Wyoming and all over the state of Utah and Idaho and everything. And I had to take my kids with me. I didn't, I was going to be gone for a couple of days. I didn't have, somebody to take care of them. And so we had a minivan, and they listened to books on tape, and they brought all these activities to do in the car. And I didn't homeschool my kids, but I definitely spent a lot of time, I wouldn't say educating them on academic subjects,
Right.
but technically everything's academic. We just spent a lot of time exploring and learning. And my 3 older ones, I have a younger one. He's kind of he came at a different time in my life, so it was a different circumstances. But they all just love learning to this day. I mean, when Harry Potter came out, Friday night, it was always released on a Friday night, they would get the book, and all 3 of them, they would stay up all night long because all 3 of them had to finish it by Monday morning. So, I mean, they are ferocious readers, and it's really helped them in their life. And that's my passion, is learning. And I wanted to bring that into the corporate arena. I will admit that if we want to talk about trauma and adversity, a lot of my clients brought a lot of trauma and adversity. And it's just, I will admit, I was really disappointed when I went into the corporate space and their philosophy on learning. It was all about, here's some information, hope you can figure out what to do with it. And so I was like, no, I want to make sure that, like, my little tagline or elevator speech, whatever you want to call it, we embed learning into the fabric of what you do every day. We want it just to be part of everything you do. I don't want to take you out of the workplace, put you in a classroom, teach you some information, and hope when you come back that you can then translate it. And I'll share this experience because I think it's really relevant to learning and adversity. When I was first married, I was married to a person who had a significant disability. He was blind. And we were starting a business, teaching people to use assistive technology when it was brand new. This was like, before all of the early 1990s. Right. And voice recognition was new on the market. And so we decided we were going to, and we were flat broke. When I say we were beyond broke, okay? But we decided to put on a credit card our reseller license, and we were living in Wyoming, and we needed to go to Boston for the training. Of course, all of our airfare, all of our travel expenses, everything. Plus I had to buy a computer. That was another couple $1,000, a laptop computer. And the whole trip was a nightmare. As we started off driving to the airport, and the airport was like 3.5, because we were driving from Wyoming to Denver. It was like a 4-hour drive, and it was snowing, and we had to go over the mountain passes in Wyoming. And we finally got there, and we got there just barely in time, and we were stressed. Our flight got to we finally took off out of Denver, and we were late getting to Chicago. And then we got to Chicago, the weather was bad, and this is crazy. And then the flight was delayed out of Chicago because the crew timed out, and they had to call in a pilot, and the pilot was at the Chicago Bulls game, and he wasn't coming till the game was over. So we were seriously? Okay. So anyway, we finally got to Boston at 4:00 in the morning, and all the car rental places were closed. So we had to wait till 6:00 when the car rental places opened. And then by then it took us an hour to get there. And by the time I had no sleep. And so we went to this training, and it was a 5-day training. The first day I was there, it was just horrible. Everything I tried on my computer didn't work. And so we were supposed to be learning about how to talk to your computer so that it would understand you. And I was over here with the tech support trying to just make the computer work and function, And so I was like, I'm not learning this. And I'm not exaggerating when I say 5 days went by, and every day it was the same. They'd bring me in a new computer, it wouldn't work. They'd bring me in a new computer, it wouldn't work. I was like, so I was like so angry when I went home. I literally took my laptop computer and my manuals, and I threw them in a closet. And I was like, I just spent $10,000 that I didn't have.
Wow.
And I was just fuming, and I just was so angry. And I was like, oh, I can't believe I did this. I didn't learn anything. This was a waste of my time. And I didn't have a computer background to begin with either, right?
All right.
So, but being the person I am, after a few weeks, I opened the closet door, looked at the stuff, and went, okay. Brought out the computer, brought out the manuals. Sure enough, I turn on the computer, try to do what it says in the manual, and guess what? It doesn't work. But I was like, you know what? When I was there in Boston, I remember having to work with the tech support guy to fix this, Mm-hmm. And so for the next, couple weeks, I found that every time something didn't work on my computer and that things weren't going well, I had the manual to teach me how to talk to the computer, mm-hmm. How to fix your computer. And this is, being an IT person a little bit, you can appreciate this. This was in the days when you had dip switches, and, you had to go in, and getting the hardware to work was as difficult as getting the software to work. And, but I could fix it. And then on top of that, our business was driving all around the state of Wyoming and Idaho and Utah and training people to use this. Well, and we didn't have cell phones. Sometimes I'd be up on a mountain in Wyoming somewhere training somebody, and I couldn't call anybody when things didn't work. I knew how to fix it. I was like, and this was one of the hardest things when I was in corporate training, was convincing, and I will admit I wasn't very convincing, to say, hey, training should not be a sanitized version of what you should learn. Let's have our learners make mistakes. Let's build mistakes into the process so that when they do go back to work and they encounter these mistakes, they know how to do it. But that was an uphill battle, let me tell you.
Makes sense. It makes sense though. So fast forward with your company now, are you still working with corporate clients and trying to still offer those same type of training type of services, or has it elevated now where like it's much more different technology that's going on?
Well, I don't do a lot with assistive technology, I will admit that. But and I actually quasi-retired from even instructional design per se. But if people come, I don't go out and promote those services. But if people come to me, and through the years of having done it for so long, I do have people come to me. And as a matter of fact, I'm working with 2 different clients right now on helping them. But the nice thing is now I can be much more selective. I'm not so desperate for money that I have to take every client that comes my way.
Gotcha.
And I interview my clients. I'm like, this is what I have to offer. If you don't like what I have to offer, go find somebody who does. Because wants what you have. Because I want to do things the way I have learned is best for people to learn.
I think it's a beautiful thing when you have that luxury.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned when you got into this business, you got into it with a husband, and he had a significant disability. And like you said, I could imagine that could be extremely challenging. I've had business partners before and things did not go well, right? So you decided to get into business with your husband, is even more of a challenge as I think about it, because it works for some people. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but I do know that sometimes it's hard for people to separate business and their personal relationship and things like that. So I know that you had to face a good bit of adversities in your personal life that could have tied into your business too as well. That we had spoke earlier about that you've been divorced. So if you can tell us a little bit about what was it like being married, and what was it like, or what were some types of challenges that you guys faced working together, living together, that caused for that separation, and how did it affect your business?
Well, to be honest, the business side of it wasn't the most challenging part. Being young and naive, and I was naive, very naive. When you get married, especially when you're young, you go into it with rose-colored glasses, and it's like, yeah, I could see a lot of red flags going into the relationship, but you see them through rose-colored glasses. They're like, love will solve all of that. We love each other. Well, first of all, let's put it this way. I loved him. He openly admitted from day one, and this should have been the biggest red flag of all, is that he didn't love me.
Wow.
And but he said, I need you. I want you to be a part of my life, but I'm just not in love with you the way most people are. And once again, I thought, and our whole 2-year relationship before we got married was absolutely horrific. And that should have been another big red flag. But like I said, there was just enough good in it to keep me going, And every time I would break up, he would come back and beg me, to stay in the relationship. And I'd be like, okay. And all the promises that I'm going to change and all this kind of stuff. Right.
What causes a woman to stay in that type of relationship?
Okay. So this gets on the religious side of things. Are you ready?
Okay. All right.
My husband now totally agrees with me, but in the world we live in today, I can tell you there's going to be a huge part of your audience that's going to totally disagree with me here.
Okay.
But I was a virgin when we started dating, and we had sex. And as a girl, I was emotionally attached. I I think guys have and my husband will attest to this. So it's not just me as a girl. My now husband will tell you that guys have sex and they can kind of move on. Girls, especially your first sexual encounter, it's like, I'm emotionally attached to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm connected to you in a way that I've never been connected. Because I had dated several other, guys in my life. And, yes, when we broke up, I cried and, oh, well, we moved on. But I just couldn't break that bond that existed on my end. Obviously, it didn't exist on his end, but it
Mm-hmm.
existed on my end. And on top of that, I was a very religious person, and I felt like I had been soiled, um, and that no good guy was ever going to want me anyway.
Mm.
And people have to remember this was 40 years ago. That's the world we lived in. I mean, yes, people had sex a lot more frequently, than they did in the 1920s or whatever. But it was hard. And so I stayed with him for that reason. He stayed with me, and these are his words, because he knew I was going somewhere in life and he wanted to ride on my coattails. I know.
Wow, that was straight to the point.
Talk about dysfunctional, right? Who's more dysfunctional, me or him?
I've never heard anybody was up front and blunt, straight to the point, and saying something like that. That's what did you say after that?
Like I said, okay, I won't even begin to go into all of the horrible things that happened during our dating. But there came a point where I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm out of here. And remember, this is the time before cell phones and all this, technology and everything. And I had bought myself a one-way ticket back to Alaska, because Alaska was kind of oh, this is where I have all the best memories of my life, right? So I sold my car and bought a one-way ticket to Alaska, and I had no money. So I figured once I got there, I wouldn't have any way of coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And, we still had to pay long distance phone calls and things like that. So I'd have no money to talk to him. I could finally break that tie. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, we were sitting there and we were in a fight and arguing and whatever. And he looked at me and he says, so if you stay, I'll marry you. And I was like, okay. And a week later, we got married.
What?
I know.
Cheryl.
I know. I know. I know. Very dysfunctional person. Coming from a very functional family and a very good upbringing and everything. If this is all you knew about my life, you would say, man, you are the most dysfunctional person I've ever met.
You know that in 2023, that would not fly. Like divorce rates are through the roof.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that would not fly.
No, it wouldn't. But we got married, and I will admit, once we got married, our relationship improved dramatically.
Wow. So it seems like your faith kept you grounded. It seemed like your faith kept you guys attached. It seems like your faith kept you bonded through the midst of it all to actually say yes and actually go through with this relationship. So can you talk a little bit about like your faith and what was that like growing up? And then was your husband in tune with you when it came to like your faith? And I say that because me and my wife was talking the other day, and I was telling her now I see a lot more men in church. But when I was growing up, men rarely go to church or was even faith in tuned or anything like that. So was anything with your relationship tied to your faith or your spirituality?
No.
No.
But I will tell you, and my mom will tell you this too. I don't know why I was born with a tremendous amount. Not everybody has it. And not just, I believed in God. I went to church. My family went to church. But my mom's like, you were just born with this love of the Lord and, and Jesus Christ, and you have faith in them. And that's what she said. She's always like, you would go run off a cliff and say, okay, Jesus, save me. And he would. you know? And I think that's I grew up with that mentality. I just knew that Jesus was going to save me from anything. And I think that's what I thought when I got married was he's going to save me from all of this. Right. And to a degree, he really did. When we first were married, we moved away from Wyoming, which was probably the biggest and best thing we did because of his roots and his ties to Wyoming, not necessarily mine.
Right.
But I got to be a flight attendant. That's a whole different story. And that was a very interesting story. But when we moved, the only person he had now was me. He didn't have his friends and all these other distractions and things that were causing tremendous problems in our relationship. But it was still a very rocky relationship. He had no interest in church. He had no interest in any of that kind of thing. And at one point, we got in this huge fight. And I know this is really hard to believe. You'd have to read my book. It's called Faith, the Power Within, to kind of get a better picture of this story. But yes, as a blind person, he was incredibly active. He went downhill skiing, he lifted weights, he rode bikes, and yes, he had a little bit of sight, but yes, he was really like totally blind in one eye and 20 over 1200 in the other. And yes, it's because he put a gun to his head and it severed one optic nerve and the bullet was lodged in the other. So, that's a whole nother story in and of itself too. But he got really mad at me and he threw me up the stairs, not down the stairs, up the stairs, and ended up breaking a vertebrae in my neck. And this was early on in our relationship. And I remember saying to him, if you ever, 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 ever do anything like that again, I will leave. And I don't think he believed me because fast forward 4 kids and, 15 years later, the straw that broke the camel's back. And in between that time, he was never physically abusive to me. Yes, there was a lot of other kind of stuff going on, but I remember it was on a Saturday and my oldest was like 12 and my youngest was 5. And they were going to a birthday party down the street. They had just walked out the door and he was working on something. He had some power tools and a cabinet or something he was working on. And he looked up at me and he goes, do you want to talk about it? And I was like, talk about what? He goes, our relationship for the last couple of years has just been horrific. And I was like, yeah, well, if you ask me, the last 15 years have been horrific. So according to you, only the last couple of years have been horrific, whatever. And he absolutely, completely, and totally blew up. He picked me up. He threw me up against the wall. He took me in the bedroom. He pinned me down on the bed. He put a pillow over my face. And I was, what his intent was, I can't ever say. You can't ever say what people's intentions were. But what he did certainly could easily have killed me. Come to find out, in my research or whatever, is that, that is one of the most common ways that men will abuse their wives is by trying to suffocate them. Mm-hmm. But this is the most interesting part of the story was as I was fighting and, trying to kick him and get him off of me or whatever, my kids came home and they were at the foot of the bed and they were crying and they were screaming and they were begging him to get off me. And I was in between breaths trying to, scream at them to call 911. And they were too scared. They wouldn't call 911. And finally, through all their begging and crying, he finally got off of me. And I called 911. He went and broke the fish tank, smashed pictures on the walls, went crazy. The kids were scared to death. And the police came, and then he went off to jail. And but as things started to settle down, I was talking to my kids and I was like, you guys went to a birthday party. Why? What? I mean, you clearly didn't make it even to the birthday party because you came back way too soon. And I said, why did you come back? And my one daughter looked at me and she says, because Jesus came and told us we needed to go home.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You just had chills go down my spine, Cheryl.
It still sends chills down my spine.
My God. Wow. Okay.
And yes, that's when I left.
I applaud you for leaving. You know, I was doing some research, and 1 in 4 women experience some severe type of intimate abuse or physical violence from their partner. And what I was reading, that leads to a world of post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yes.
and it creates such a domino effect on the person, the victim themselves, and anyone that witnesses it and sees it, such as like your kids. And man,
Yeah.
okay, so
Yes, I have complex PTSD.
to to go through something like that, obviously I cannot imagine, and obviously you did the right thing. Can you, if you can, talk a little bit about afterwards, the after effect with yourself and your kids? Did you have to seek any types of counseling? Did you have to take them to any type of counseling or anything like that? How were you able to like what strategies did you put in place to like recover from that?
Well, and there's so much to all of this. And we could talk for hours. That's get my book. It'll make a lot more sense because there's a lot of gaps here that aren't going to be filled in the time frame that we have. But when the whole 15 years I was married to him was extremely stressful. And literally the last 5 years that we were married, I had 4 young kids. I was married to a blind guy. We were struggling. To say we were struggling financially would be an understatement. I think we'd filed bankruptcy at one point during this part, in our business. But actually, our business had finally kicked off and was starting to do well. And I was working between 12 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, and just going all the time. And I thought, wow, man, I'm like 35 years old and good grief. I have more energy than you can imagine. And, and I don't need to eat. I don't need to sleep. This is wonderful. Well, you can imagine you can't live your life that way forever, right?
No.
So when we separated, there was it was a very contentious divorce. And during mediation, we were going back and forth over the table about various things. And we got to the point where the schedule for visitation for the kids. And the mediator was driving me crazy because he's like, well, what schedule do I want? Well, it's not what I want. It's what the kids want. This is about the kids. This is not about me. And then he would say, here's the schedule I want. Anyway, long story short, we went back and forth. And I always knew, let's go back to the reason he married me, right? I always knew money was his main motivation in life. And he told me money is his God. I heard that so many times when we were married. Money is his God. And the light bulb went off. And I said, because at this point, we were $100,000 in debt with our business, but we were starting to make money and starting to get traction going somewhere.
Right.
And I just looked at him and I said, I will take all of the debt. I will give you the business if you will waive all visitation to your kids. And it didn't take him less than 5 seconds. And he agreed. And he signed away his rights to his kids.
Wow.
Yeah. But that was a really good thing. But, during that year period that we were going through mediation and everything, I was homeless. We were moving around from hotel to motel, just trying. We had no money. And he had all the money. And we didn't have any of the money. And so we weren't even living paycheck to paycheck because we didn't have paychecks. And people were trying to help us and support us and that type of thing. And it was just an extraordinarily difficult time. And yeah, it was hard. But to this day, I never ever regret. I could have made it so much easier on myself financially, but I do not regret that decision at all.
Well, I think it's amazing to see you where you're at now. So, you know, going through that struggle, going through that journey, and you saying what you're saying now, I believe that you could truly see how your decisions paid off. Because imagine if it would have went the opposite way and the kids were with him, and
Mm-hmm.
what would that outcome would have been like. So I think you made a great decision, and I think look at you now, like now you're thriving and doing successfully well. So I just applaud you for doing that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, like I said, this story's way too long, and I'm sure, like, when we were talking about your story, I'm like, oh, we could talk for hours on your story. I'm sure you could write a book. You should write a book. Um, but I do remember, well, even that wasn't even the end of all of my, because I did get remarried, and then we had a blended family situation, and that brought on a lot of unique challenges. And when we got married, the guy that I ended up getting married to wasn't making, he was literally making $17 an hour. And so we had to live off his $17 an hour with 4 kids. So my financial problems, and we ended up filing bankruptcy 2 more times after that. It got easier in a lot of ways because he was more aligned with me spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I have complex PTSD. I've gone through a lot of different therapies. I've been diagnosed with a mental health issue. Obviously, nobody can work 5 years of their life that way. And so I've been on medication for a long time. A lot of those things have played into, helping me be successful now. But I guess if one thing really sticks out at me, like what is kind of the mindset that you have to be in to deal with all of these challenges and just keep going is, yeah, number one.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. What was your mindset, with going through that for 15 years, you know what I mean? To just sustain that, stay in that, just living that day to day. And then you guys are crossing paths. You guys are seeing each other. You guys are working together. And that must have been super, super, super complicated to stay in that and go through that and experience that.
Not really. Like I said, I had faith when I was born. I grew up with it. And everybody's like, oh, what a great blessing. And it's like, no, the more faith you have, the more the Lord tries your faith, right? It's not like he says, oh, we're going to let you coast along with this level of faith, right? He's like, yeah, you got here, you got to go here. Oh, you got here, you got to go here. I'm like, oh, please. And I do remember a scripture that jumped out at me over and over and over again was the Lord chastens those he loves. And I was like, man, you must love me a lot.
So
I really believe that. No, I really believe that. I really do believe. And, people are like, you always hear all these cliche kind of things like, don't look at it as a challenge, look at it as a learning experience. I'm like, when you're in the middle of all this, no, I don't care what it is. It sucks. There was a point where I seriously was like, I felt like I was in the bottom of a deep, dark hole. And I didn't want out of it. I did not want out of it because I felt like every time I would peek my head up above and start to see light, somebody would come and just kick me and boot me right back down in that hole. I'm like, oh no, it's safe down here. It may be dark. It may be dank and kind of stinky and nasty, but it sure beats the heck out of getting your head kicked every time you peek your head up against, and start to see the light. And so I did. I kind of just settled into, this is my life. It's not going to get any better than this. That's not a real hopeful message. But it
Yeah,
was, I was in survival mode.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about what compounded into some of the situations. So you said you filed for bankruptcy 3 times, it sounded like, right?
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What was going filing through bankruptcy like? What was that in regards to like managing that, dealing with that, and working with all these different people now, all in your business and everything that's going on mentally, emotionally. You know what I mean?
Honestly, the
Moving
bankruptcy.
around and around.
Well, we kept moving around and around because a lot of times, it would be like I was like, and I have PTSD over buying houses, by the way, because every time I'd buy a house, I'd end up losing them. I've lost 3 properties to
Wow.
foreclosure. Yeah. And I was like, nope, we're going to rent. We're going to rent because as soon as we can't afford to rent, they'll just kick us out. And I don't have to deal with all this paperwork and bankruptcy and all this kind of stuff. Finances to me were just, you just reach a point where you don't even care. It's like, do I have enough money to feed my kids? Do we have a roof over our head? Okay, I'm good. I don't care if I make any more money than that. All I need, and I will tell you, I have a great set of parents. My parents are wonderful. They were always very supportive, and I never worried that I would be totally homeless. Yes, at one point I was moving around from motel to motel for reasons we won't get into here, but I always knew I could go to my parents' house and say, hey, I need a place to stay. And they would feed me and they would, make sure I had a roof over my head and give me time to recuperate, and there were times where I had to do that. So I had great parents, wonderful parents who were very
Mhm.
supportive. Despite all of this, they were never critical of me. They were never like, well, you kind of made your bed here, They were super supportive. And it was friends like that. It was family that just, or I should say, my parents, the rest of my family wasn't so supportive, but I had great friends. And if I could read my book, the number of times, I'll give you one brief example, but this is nothing compared to the other financial blessings that I received, was when I was going through the divorce. We had no money. I said, no money. And my mom and my dad got how when you work for companies, they give you a gift certificate for a turkey
Yeah.
or something for Christmas. Well, they gave me their gift certificate and I went to the grocery store and that $25 was all I had. And my kids were like, Mom, we need to buy presents for, school, it only costs $1 or something, right? Whatever. And I was like, oh, I can't afford $1 right now. But I went to the grocery store and I was like, put blinders on. I was like, I'm going to get what I need. I'm going to put it in the basket. And when I get to the checkout stand, whatever comes over $25, I'll just take it and send it back, right? Do you know what the bill totaled?
What, $24.99?
$25 exactly.
Wow.
And if I told you, that's one drop in the bucket of the times that the Lord blessed me. I was always a person who paid tithing, even throughout all of these financial difficulties. And I always knew that if I gave the Lord my 10th, he would make sure that I was taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. He never, ever, ever let me down. Never.
Yeah. So you got remarried
Mm-hmm.
into another situation, which was with a blended family. And, I too have been remarried and I was in a blended family. We experienced some challenges and things like that. What was being in a blended family for you based off the new situation and knowing that you was coming out of a past situation? Did you experience any challenges during that experience in this relationship? And then how did you manage to cope with those things, deal with those things? Did you put any types of strategies into based off your previous marriage, moving into this marriage?
Number one, Absolutely 100% number one. When I got married the second time, I was like, I need somebody who spiritually aligns with me.
Mhm.
That was number one. I was not going to make that mistake again. Number two, I was going to marry somebody who loved me, right? um, and even at that point, I was not naive enough to think that, love was going to get us through everything. I knew that that was, kind of a misnomer. But there were challenges, and certainly, and the good and the bad news, he didn't have kids, but he obviously adopted, not, he didn't legally adopt them, but he adopted my kids because they didn't have a dad. Their dad pretty much sold them out for money.
Pretty much,
right?
yeah.
So he took on the role and responsibility of being their father, and he'd never been a father. He had no idea what he was doing, and he'll tell you that. It was very challenging for him, and we had a lot of disagreements about things. But because we spiritually aligned with each other, and
Mhm.
because he had that same kind of, he didn't have the kind of faith that I had, but he certainly had the same spiritual upbringing and background that I did. So that was helpful, but I can't say that it was, like, oh, everything's all better now. We still had tremendous financial difficulties because of all the debt that so not only did he marry me with 4 kids, he married me with 4 kids and $100,000 worth of debt.
Wow.
And he was making $17 an hour.
Wow.
So, for him to do that takes a very special kind of a person. And in the back of my mind, when things would get tough and we would have our differences, and we never had knockdown drag out fights like I had before. I never had any concerns that he was going to emotionally or physically abuse me in any way, shape, or form. But still, you've been there. Marriage is never easy, right?
Right.
But I knew in the back of my mind, number one, he loved me, and that we were on the same path. So, that was, and I did have to remind myself at times that he's never had kids before. He doesn't. My youngest was 5 or 6, whatever, when we got married. And this was all new to him.
Mhm.
So I had to cut him some slack there. And I had to remind myself, look what he's taken on. What kind of person is it that would do this? Yes, he's not perfect, but my goodness, look. And that would really help me get through some of the difficult times that we had.
Yeah, 100%. I applaud him, based off the circumstance and the situation that you guys are walking into. He could have easily said, "I'm not doing this.
I
I
know.
I, I don't want to sign up for this." You know what I mean? And he chose to love you authentically, love your
Mhm.
kids, support you, do the best he can financially with whatever he can, and ultimately, be a provider as much as he can too as well.
Well, and it's interesting because it was shortly within 6 months of us getting married, he went from $17 an hour to 30. He went to work for Micron Technologies. You're an IT
Mhm.
guy. Okay. And that really skyrocketed his,
Nice.
um, his earning potential. Yes, he had to start at 30,000, but he moved up very quickly. He's incredibly gifted and smart when it comes to IT things,
Mhm.
and Micron afforded him a lot of opportunities for education and things like that. So
Nice.
he really, like right now, he is a cybersecurity expert. He works for a white shoe law firm downtown in DC for their cybersecurity division.
Nice. Nice. Nice.
Yeah, he's come a long way
Good.
financially.
Good. So based off of all of the adversities that you face, what what is like your perspective on and outlook on life and with all of the things that you've been through?
Okay, this one's really going to blow you away, and I'm sure it'll blow the audience away. After the little tiny bit I've told you about all my wonderful life up till now, the hardest thing that I've ever been through was COVID.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah. And it
What
wasn't,
happened?
I didn't get COVID. And I have always, if you've been to my website and seen, if you go look at the fifth principle, I've kind of shifted gears, like I said, for my instructional design business. And I teach constitutional classes, and I teach history and things like that, because that's something I've always had a passion for, but never have been able to monetize. And right now I don't monetize it. I teach it because I think it's so important. I passionately love my country, and I see it slipping away. And the beginning of COVID, from the very beginning, when I started to see them implement all of these different, what I considered authoritative methods of dealing with it, I was like, no, this is not good. This is not good. And everybody's like, oh, no, it's just, we'll get through this, once. And I was like, no. And what, 3, 4 years later, where are we? I will admit I was right. No. But during that time, the hardest thing, and my mom will tell you this, I have always been a person that's just relishes freedom to do what I want, to make my own choices, to live with the consequences of my choices, to do things, and to inhibit my ability to enjoy the freedom that I was born with was probably the hardest thing I had to deal with. And the reason, I think, even though I lived in this dark hole, I still, for some reason, I still had a level of hope. But when COVID hit, I lost all hope that we would ever be able to turn this mess around and go back to the life that I had before. I would take the life that I had before, with all of its challenges, to a life living in Russia or China or somewhere else. And, you've kind of been there too.
All right.
I think that's that. I know that sounds crazy. And until you've been in my head and been the kind of person I am that just relishes freedom on that level, it's hard. That was hard, because I didn't have hope. And I'm just now starting to gain a little bit of that hope back. And my fifth principle learning cooperative is all about trying to restore that hope, trying to restore not necessarily what we had before, but learning from the mistakes that we've made in the past historically, and taking that and moving forward in a way so that we can all live that free life. And yes, make mistakes, and yes, have challenges, and yes, get beat up. But you can come out a better person. And yes, I know, I've read, what is it? Man's Search for Meaning, and Viktor Frankl. And, even in the worst of circumstances, you can, have hope and everything. But he had hope that he would one day get out of that prison camp. And he did. I didn't have that hope. I felt like I was living in a prison camp, and I don't want to compare myself to his circumstances, please. No.
Right.
But the feelings were similar. But I didn't have hope. I didn't have hope that we were going to turn this around.
Yeah, when the world went on extreme, complete lockdown, I'm not even sure what it was like for you in your city or state, but here in South Florida, we did start off a bit strict, but people became a bit lax about it. I think South Florida people are a little bit free spirited mindset down here in South Florida. North Florida could have been a little bit different, but South Florida, the restrictions on the face mask and all these other things and stuff like that was kind of crazy based off what I was seeing. And just I also think it was interesting, if you was like locked in on the news, like you could go crazy.
Yeah.
You could go crazy if you was locked in on the news.
Yeah. You couldn't listen to the news. And this kind of goes back to my mental health issues. I've always had claustrophobia, extreme case of claustrophobia. And that's why I believe my husband did what he did to me when he covered my face with a pillow, because he knew, whether he was trying to kill me or not, I can't say. But I can say he put that pillow over my face because he knew that was my major weakness. And I can't wear masks. I mean, putting a face something over my face like that,
Uh-huh.
it just it triggers something in me, and I can't. I hyperventilate and have panic attacks. And so you can imagine, I lived in Northern Virginia at the time, not even here. And believe me, Northern Virginia may as well have been New York or California or whatever, because you did not go anywhere without a mask, anywhere without a mask. When they finally started easing up a little bit, I went into a grocery store without a mask because we didn't have to wear masks anymore. And I remember this little boy just staring at me. And he followed, because we were in line waiting to check out, and he was just staring at me. And then he was like, Mom, Mom. And I was like, seriously? Look, this is what we're conditioning our children, that if you don't have this thing over your face, they don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, I can't do this. I can't go out in public. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that sounds weird. I know it sounds weird, that was probably the hardest thing in my life.
Yeah, I was not one the furthest I've went to like wearing something over my face was like when I served in the military, but that was like when
Mhm,
I was in Iraq, you know.
mhm,
And
yeah,
then for the most part, most times whenever I see people with a mask, it was like construction workers, you know, or
mhm,
people. I do see that whenever I'm in the airport a good bit, I would see Asian people
mhm,
wearing
yeah,
masks and things like that. But
yeah,
so to make that our new norm, that
mhm.
was extremely, extremely difficult if that's not your daily habits, daily practice that you do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, and
I
when you can't go anywhere,
right. You're not going to be let inside of anywhere. You can't travel. You can't do anything. So
mhm,
you have to stay in your own little bubble.
mhm,
I wanted to touch on some a couple things here before we hop out of here. You know, you had said that your ex-husband, you know, went blind for trying to kill himself, and obviously after your encounter with him, he did go off to prison. And I wanted to ask you, did you factor in once that situation was over that I should forgive this person, or you're gonna hold whatever they did against you for the rest of your life? Like, how did you cope and how did you deal with that? You know, as you was going through your recovery process.
that's another interesting thing, because there have been some other challenges in my life where I've had a hard time forgiving people. So it's
Hmm.
not. Let me preface this with I'm not the most forgiving person in the world. Okay,
Hmm.
forgiving him was easy. Number one, because I didn't have to deal with him on a daily basis, because I didn't. The kids, once you break the tie
All right.
and walk away, and I had emotionally checked out of that relationship, like he was right, for the last couple of years. I was totally emotionally checked out of the relationship. And I didn't have to forgive him. It was more about forgiving myself,
Mm.
because I made the mistake. I made the choice. I went into this relationship knowing he didn't love me. I went into the relationship knowing he was blind. This didn't happen when we were married. Yes, I made that choice. Um, I knew he wasn't spiritually aligned with me. It was more about forgiving myself. He was who he was. He did what he did, but I allowed him to do that to me.
So knowing that you've moved forward and you've overcame this type of adversity, what what are some things that you do now to like, you know, work on your self-care, your self-worth, your self-balance, and you know, to just be in tune and present with Cheryl now, with yourself, your husband, your family, your business, and all these types of things you got going on.
Well, I do what everybody else. Like I said, I don't want to, everybody meditates. I read my scriptures. I pray. I go to church. I have hope. All of those things that, everybody's going to tell you to do. Um, but I think the thing that is a couple things that are most significant to me, coming out of COVID, I really did get into a rut, a really deep rut, one that I didn't feel like I could turn around or get out of, and I didn't have hope. But to get myself out of it, once all the lockdowns and everything eased up and everything, was really getting back into something that I love. I love teaching these constitutional courses, and I have a Bible study group that I lead on Sunday nights, and it's just, there's only between 6 and 10 people in it. It's a small group, but we all support each other. We all go through the Bible. It's and on top of that, it's interesting. It's a founder's Bible. It's around here somewhere, but it's David Barton has taken so much of our constitutional history and our founding fathers, and where they used the Bible to create our Constitution. He's really done a beautiful job of putting all this in an American Standard Bible. That's the Bible that he uses. And we go through and we look at what were our founding fathers thinking when this happened, or when they tried to do this, and from a biblical perspective. And it's interesting because last week we didn't have Bible study because of Father's Day. And I was like, wow, I feel kind of empty. This is weird, because I go to church every Sunday, but if I miss, once in a while I miss church, I don't feel this emptiness, but I felt this emptiness. I was like, this is weird. And it brings me great hope. It brings me joy. And it's what's gotten me out of this rut is going back and looking at history, and looking at and not just American history. That's my favorite by far, but just, it's like, look at what those people went through, and look at their vision, not just the challenges and the trials they went through. Yes, those were tremendous, but the vision that they had. And that's what has given me hope to move on, is vision. And this vision of creating a new world, because I do believe COVID caused this major reset in our world. And although I love all of the biblical principles, and I love, all of our constitutional foundations and everything, and I want to bring a huge part of that into a world moving forward, I still think we don't live in 1776.
True.
We don't live in 1860. We've got to adapt it to the world that we have. And I just joined a mastermind, which I'd never heard of such a thing before, but and it's all about AI and Web3 and those type of things, and how those things are going to impact our future. And I'm part of a leadership organization within this Legion mastermind that I'm part of, and it's how are we going to deal with these new challenges from a leadership perspective. And it has gotten me out of the rut, and it has given me hope. And I'm like, oh, so I think really just finding your passion, finding something that makes you excited to get up every morning.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm big into the AI now. I use it or incorporate it into my business, and it makes things so seamless, or things that you don't want to think about. As long as you verify it, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It makes things a bit seamless. I was at a small business conference last week, and they were giving a training on it in regards to your Chat GPTs, Bard, your video AIs, you name it, and all of these different prompts you could create, and how to incorporate it in your life and your business. Any one of those factors, how it could make things so much seamless.
But it also has the potential to do a tremendous amount of harm.
I agree.
And so that's part of this leadership organization that I'm with, is how can we leverage this in ways that are good and minimize the ways that it can be harmful.
I agree. I also seen that there is a strike by the Writers Guild, and
oh, go figure.
People are writing books, they're making songs, and
Yes.
taking these guys' talents and gifts, about to put them out of work.
Hey, Chat GPT did not write my book. I'll tell you that. I've written a lot of things with Chat GPT, but not my book. But I'm tempted to rewrite it. I have been seriously tempted to rewrite it. See what Chat GPT would come up with.
Probably would.
Yeah.
So, as we get ready to wrap up and close out of here, this has been a phenomenal conversation to have with you, and such an amazing story and inspirational. You're like that phoenix rising from the ash
Yeah.
because you've you've been knocked down quite a few times, a lot of times,
Mhm.
through the relationship issues, the financial issues, and just some other struggles that I know that you didn't really want to go deep into here, which is totally fine. So, our listening audience, can you give us some final words of encouragement, some inspiration based off your life experiences, your personal experiences, your business experiences that you want to impart to them?
Well, it goes back to the one scripture, and I wish I could cite it, but you know, I really do believe this. I really do. And it is because I've lived it. Is, the Lord chastens those he loves. And I believe that I have been chastened for mistakes, my own mistakes that I have made, for things that have happened to me that were out of my control, and for things that have happened in the world. I think chasten is an interesting word that they chose to use. If we go back and study Hebrew or Greek, whatever, not exactly sure the exact translation there, but the Lord loves me, and as long as He loves me, and I know for a fact, I can tell you this, in spiritual terms, I can bear testimony that our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ loves not just me, He loves you, and He loves all of you. And He is not going to leave you alone. You may feel alone sometimes. And there have been times I felt alone and I felt like He wasn't there, but He was. Over time, if you hang in there, you'll see His hand in everything you do.
Absolutely. Whenever I think of the moments that I've been alone, I think about like Moses and the burning bush, and it's usually during those times when you're alone when he comes and talks to you and come
Mhm.
in and get you. You know what I mean? Every
Mhm.
single time that something has occurred, that's what I think about. And I agree with you 100%. He's the truth, he's the way, and he's going to be a part of your life.
Mhm. I don't know how people get through this life without Him. I just don't. I don't.
Absolutely. So, Cheryl, if anybody wanted to work with you to book in another podcast, book you for speaking, talk to you about your book, or just to do business with you and your company, how can they get a hold of you?
My website is thefifthprinciple.coop, COOP, or just at the fifth principle. And if you want to email me, that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me is Cheryl, CHERYL, at thefifthprinciple.coop. And yes, on a note, on the book, it's written under a pen name because there's a lot of sensitive information in there about other people. They might not want your name out there. I'll put my name out there. I don't care.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for stopping by, being totally transparent, being totally vulnerable with your life, your story, and your business, and just sharing some straight up wisdom with us and just your life experience. I just want to tell you thank you so much for doing that.
Well, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Until next time, guys, we drop episodes weekly. We'll have some more phenomenal guests. We love you. Peace.
Can't complain at all. Couple dollars in my pocket, no income and go. Been working on my body, getting healthier. Thank God for clarity.